That's the mistake the West keeps on making over and over again. The West thinks that, okay, because our progressive values are so good, the rest of the people, no matter what culture they come from, no matter how regressive or inward-looking culture they have, we're going to introduce them to our progressive values, and they'll be smitten by it, and they would convert in hordes. No, Europe has shown you 3 or 4 generations later, people are more looking inwards than they were, than their original ancestors were. So you can't woo everyone with your progressive leftist values. So if that's your assumption that, okay, well, if we live together in this united state of Israel and Palestine, then they will become like us. No, they won't become like you. They will make you a dhimmi. That's what they'll do.
So this is sort of one of my first forays into the topic of Islam and talking about religion and atheism more generally. The one exception is I spoke previously with Corey Gill-Schuster, if you might be familiar with him. He runs the Ask Project on YouTube, which is a wonderful channel for anyone listening.
I haven't followed them much, but I've seen them, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, but this is something, I'm more interested in and more knowledgeable about than a lot of the other conversations I've had. So I would like to make this more of a regular topic on the channel. So, you're a perfect person to be speaking with, and thus we are here today. So just in case any of my audience isn't familiar with you and your story, I think it would be great if you could just, give a little bit of background. Where'd you come from? What got you into the work that you do today?
Okay. I always wonder, because there are so many more ex-Muslims who've got really harrowing stories of their deconversion, or, realizing that maybe this is not for me. And then they had to face consequences for it, for their actions. My story is very boring, on the other hand. I got nothing to say. I mean, other than the fact that, I still don't think that is just me. There's something about me. I think it happens to pretty much every single person. Whenever I tell them this part of my story, I always ask, did you ever ask that question? Like at an abnormally young age, like 8 or 9. So I grew up in Pakistan, religiously conservative country. But my family was not extremely religious. They were just traditionally religious. They did all the things that, a good Muslim should do. But other than that, that's it. Mind your own business, blah, blah, blah kind of thing. So everything, and I think when you're a little child, I think the whole world is like so exciting. It's like someone was putting it, someone posed a question that, imagine the day, the first time you felt rain on your skin. It would be some really young age, 2, 3 or 4. You can't really remember that day when it happened, but imagine what a big, what an amazing experience that would have been. Something that would never be replicated again. So a child is actually seeing a lot of things for the first time, and he's inquisitive, he's creative, he's like a sponge, he's good, and it wants to absorb information. So much so they ask questions, and when when you are grown up, when you're in a university or something, some professors get angry. They're like, "Why? How come nobody's asking any question?" But when we're little children, we're asking the stupid questions. So much so that adults are actually sick of them. So I asked this question. I used to ask my mom a lot of questions. I asked my mom a question, "Mom, where did God come from? Like, who created God?" And I've written that in my book, and I've said that in many of my videos. And a lot of people, it's like, this is the worst kind of straw manning. But the point being, so I had that question. So when I trace my steps back to when I started becoming skeptical in a very conservative society, I trace it back, and I just wonder that it's not just me. I ask those questions. I think every person asks that question. Sometimes, they just give up. Either they don't want to rock the boat, or they've just come to terms with it. And there's a genuine possibility that they buy it. They just buy the answers. So there's nothing special, but it's what wonders. But I want to know, I hope that it's not special, because if it's a rare occurrence, like 1 out of 1,000 kids think that way, or 1 out of 200 kids think that way, then I think our numbers will always remain small. So I want to know it's not, and I'll ask you, I'm sure you would have asked that question too around that age, 8, 9, 10. Did you? So do you follow me? Like, I mean, so I want to know,
Yeah,
this is
absolutely.
not, I'm not special, and I genuinely believe I'm not special, but I want to see the results in the real world.
Well, you've sort of perfectly anticipated my first question, because where I was going to go initially is just to say, there are so many Muslims who leave Pakistan across the Arab world in general, and they don't come to the same conclusions you did, and they also don't have the initial insights at such a young age. So my first question was just, what do you think it is, either just fundamentally about you as a person or the experiences that helped you see the light? I mean, you're equally well resourced and educated and so on as so many other people, yet you came to a radically different conclusion than the rest.
I feel really out of place when you put it as in like you, like as in me. I'm not that unique. There are literally, even in Pakistan, even from that society, there are literally maybe tens of thousands of them. But again, like in a country of 220 million people, tens of thousands, even 100,000, it's not that special. But I know that since there are 100,000, so you're not special. There's nothing special about it. So it doesn't go back to me as in person. I think it maybe it does to some point. I think some of us are a bit more skeptical. Some of us like to challenge the authority a little bit more. Some of us are not worried about rocking the boat. So those little individual personality traits may exist, but even those ones, I just hope that they're not that unique. And I think they're not unique, because the same people who may switch off their skeptical hat on completely to religious authority, but they are the most skeptical people when it comes to governmental authority. So it's not the skepticism that problem. So again, so if you think that you are the world's most smartest skeptic, then no, that's not the case, because other people are thinking that too, applying the same logic. So I think that's, again, this is just my opinion. There's no well-studied research behind that, but I just think that us humans, we have this insatiable desire or hunger to to be led. We just don't want to take all the responsibilities of the world, not everything. We just want some some sort of a insurance net that we just stay within. Okay, I do this, I'll give you 8 hours a day, and I'm keep paying my wages, my house, electricity, and I'm okay. To hell with the rest. So yeah, I can't, I certainly don't believe that there's anything special about people like us, because of so many more people. But I just don't understand why it hasn't become the most obvious that you're flying donkey, or you're flying
Yeah.
monkey, or your virgin birth. So we wouldn't give any respect to these kind of claims in any other ideology in the 21st century. Maybe 100 years ago, yes, they would have. But now we're so skeptical about everything. But we're not skeptical about that. I don't know. I don't have the answer, I guess.
Yeah, it's very strange to me how religion has still maintained this very unique and very unjustified position as one of the untouchable things. One of the things you say, if somebody chooses to believe that, that's their faith, and that's sort of where it should be left, unless that person sort of initiates it further. And in my own context, so just to give you some information, I grew up secularly, never went to a synagogue, a church, a mosque, anything. My mom's side of the family is Jewish. My dad's side of the family is not, again, non-practicing. And I had a very similar experience being very young. I couldn't tell you the exact age, but I would say certainly before 11, 12 years old, where I started to ask the same questions. But it's interesting to sort of juxtapose those two, because I didn't ask that question as I'm being dragged into church, wondering why I'm here. It's still, I just saw, I had some Mormon friends. I obviously had some Jewish friends, some Muslim friends, and so on. And I just was like, what are they doing? And it is, so I guess there's just so many factors that contribute to what you just happen to think, really. I mean, it's such a complex blend of what your parents have told you, what your friends are saying, what you saw on TV, how you feel on a given day.
Mm. So my story, we got lost in that detail, but I think, yeah, so I remained a normal kind of Muslim. There was a little phase when I was 14 or 15 when I said that, okay, if this is what my religion demands me to do, then this is what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna pray. I'm gonna try to fast. I'm not gonna look at girls, like that kind of thing. Um, uh, but then I got out of that for some reason. I think I couldn't sustain that. You can't sustain a religiously moral lifestyle in this day and age. The more you try, the uglier you look. Look at the Taliban, look at ISIS, look at all the religiously conservative people. I'm sorry, they look really bad. So I couldn't sustain it. And then I moved to Australia when I was 19. I graduated from here, and I think at that point this was the booming days of Dawkins and all of those guys. So I read 4 or 5 of his books. I listened to every interview, every lecture. Back in the day, he used to do these debates as well, and Hitchens. That was the heyday of atheism. So I got convinced within, I would say, within a year or maybe year and a half max. So by 2007 or 8, I was an atheist. I found an Australian partner, my girlfriend, who happened to be Australian. I don't know, needless information, I think. But the point is, like, I was living unmarried. This concept of fornication, everything. To me, she was like my wife, but we just hadn't done, the normal stuff. So I was an atheist the whole time. And an informed one, not the one. It's also become fashionable, this born again atheist who say, "Well, I was an atheist, but now I found God." When you ask them, they don't know anything about atheism. They don't. They were just partying and doing drugs or whatever they were doing, and they thought, "Oh, because I'm doing the opposite of what the Bible tells me or the Quran tells me, therefore I'm an atheist."
It's
so
a cop out, effectively.
Yeah, exactly. So when they calm down a little bit and then they're like, "Oh, born again Christian, I was an atheist." No, you weren't an atheist. So stop it. So I was an atheist like that for a very long time. I educated one, and then I saw in Pakistan they had started rounding up these atheists who were, some were blasphemous, but some were not. Some were very scholarly, very academic, and one of the guys actually was lynched by a mob, brutally by his own classmates, university fellows, whatever. So I got so angry. So I would say I say that my initial reaction was out of anger, but I haven't had any anger towards this whole situation at any point. Like I'm pretty chilled in that case. But that was like a knee-jerk reaction. Like, okay, well, if these other people are getting lynched in universities, it's so bad. But I've been an atheist for 10 plus years. I haven't done anything wrong, and I used to keep it to myself. But anyway, so that's when I created my Facebook page, and then and then within a couple of months I showed my face, and then I was the first one. So in the Western world, it probably didn't matter that much because we already had these experts. But in India and Pakistan, there's like 500 million Muslims live in that region. This kind of talk, this kind of discussion, even though this is how people get so isolated from outside world, even in the age of this day and age, they know that the outside world has got extreme opinions of about the Prophet Muhammad, but they were like, la, it's not happening. But now here's this guy, one of their own, speaks their own language and saying it on the scale that, thousands of people watching him live. So when it got to that stage, that's when I started getting some heat. Some politicians and all these guys started finding out. So anyway, but I think it's calmed down a little bit. I think it's been 4 years since we've been doing it, and now hundreds of other channels have appeared from that region. So it's actually Muslims are actually desensitized to this level of criticism. And of course, within criticism, you've got different levels. So yeah, so that's where I'm at the moment. I do feel, but I think the cultural wars in the West have actually moved even beyond this God and atheist debate. Like, so I don't know. So it's all happening.
Yeah, it is weird. It seems like, I agree, it was sort of at the center of the culture war for a while there, I guess, 2012 to 2016. And now it seems like it's in the backdrop. But I find a problem with that because I think it underpins a lot of this. I mean, to watch conversation around Israel-Palestine or immigration in Europe and all these other things without talking about Islam and without having these faith-based conversations makes no sense. I mean, it is at the root of these things. This is why people have a problem with immigration in Europe. This is why people have a lot of their own. I mean, the side you pick on Israel-Palestine often is informed by where you stand.
But it's not only just about other people. It's about why they have an opinion against their governments, even though they're born and raised in these Western countries. Now, that's an existential crisis. But we're still living in a world where they don't want to touch Islam. They don't want to talk about it. Like on the social media, it's happening a lot. So, but in the mainstream, there is this. For example, Piers Morgan, yeah, he's invited Muhammad Hijabs, he's inviting these radical Muslims, but he hasn't looked at any of the dissidents from within Muslim community who I think he would accept dissidents from political dissidents from within the Muslim community, but he would not accept dissidents from the Islamic perspective, like ex-Muslims, for example, or
Hmm.
people who are critics of Islam. He would not give them his platform because it's still inconvenient. And Richard Dawkins had succeeded in the mid part of the last decade or 2005s in removing the taboo around criticizing Christianity on that scale. Even I think even at that point, I remember his most typical criticism that he received was, "Look, you're being too intrusive. It's too impolite for you to make fun of people's Christian views." You think now it's bad? It was nothing back then. Like there was no criticism. Like you could still do it. Monty Python had been around, but we still hadn't accepted that it's just leave it. So he did that in removing this holy cow status of Christianity. He did that, but we failed with Islam, even though the Danish cartoons had happened, Charlie Hebdo was happening, but we regressed in that regard. And I think that's where wokeism got in, cultural appropriation got in, and that's where they came at the right time. They said, no, 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 no. Brown man's religion, brown man's culture. We're not gonna criticize that. This will be racist. And slowly, over the last decade or so, people got too scared of getting canceled. But I think the pendulum is shifting again. I think this cancellation factor is going down a little bit. People are becoming more and more abrupt, and I think maybe X has played a huge role in that, or maybe it's just a natural swinging of the pendulum. The people to go in one direction and then they come. Geert Wilders has won the elections, and we see these populist movement, really right-wing populist movements, are getting a lot of traction because that's probably the chain of events. I think when we look at it purely from the cultural warfare point of view.
Yeah, well, I wanted to give you one example I sort of came across the other day with a few friends that sort of blew my mind a little bit. Exactly to your point. Recently, Meta rolled out a new AI service sort of within the chat where you can do @Meta AI/Imagine and it will generate images directly between you and another person or in a group chat or what have you. And we were playing with it a little bit and are trying to see how it's been programmed in the context of Islam versus Judaism versus Christianity and so on. And to say it's interesting is an understatement because, for example, we were giving it some rather inflammatory prompts, something to the effect of, imagine a Jewish man or a rabbi or something in the forecast sitting down for a nice pork dinner, but prompting it also to be explicitly, like talking peace with an Arab neighbor, something positive, and it would do it no problem. We could go on the list, do it however we'd like. Obviously, you wouldn't do it with the Prophet Muhammad. Fair enough. That's sort of, a very specific thing to Islam. When you change that to Imam or to Muslim or to anything that's even tangentially related to Islam, oops, sorry, I can't do that for you. And then we started talking about, prompting it at what age are two people fornicating and when is that acceptable? 18 years old, depends on the laws of the country, so on. When did Prophet Muhammad consummate his marriage with Aisha? And it goes 16 to 22. And then we say, can you cite your sources? And it provides, a few sort of sketchy things. And then, we kind of got it to concede, weirdly enough, that, actually, sorry, I made a mistake. It was actually, most people think they were married at 6, consummated at 9. But it still doesn't go that extra step of getting even close to a condemnation or anything of the sort. But
it would give you other reasons it would give you other reasons. Back in those days, it used to happen. Similar kind of arguments that we've heard from Muslims. But it's ironic, isn't it, that all these religious people who hide behind, back in those days, whatever, they justify famine, they justify wars, they justify human rights abuses, slavery, everything, you name it. They hide behind back in those days. But these are the people who make the claim that they have this objective moral code, which is absolute, because it's been devised by an absolute entity. Isn't that amazing? That it's the same people These are beliefs of convenience. This is what I say. These are beliefs of convenience. People just believe whatever they want, but it's not exclusive to religious people only. I'm assuming you're going to head towards the Israel-Palestinian conflict, where anti-vaxxer or not, anti-vaxxers are now divided over Israel or Palestine, because both followed conspiracy theories, but now there's another one. Is this a Jewish conspiracy theory we need to go by, or we need to go to the Great Replacement or the Muslim Brotherhood, or that kind of conspiracy theory we need to go by? So that's why they're divided. Greta Thunberg, a lot of these people hated her. A lot of and a lot of them. I don't think people like her as much. I think she is the darling of this is exaggerated left. So I reserve my opinion as well. But the point is, a lot of these people hated her because World Economic Forum and all those conspiracy theories. But now, some are pro-Palestine, some are pro-Israel, and they're hating. And so it's amazing that how our culture is evolving right before our eyes, and now we are divided over Israel-Palestinian issue. This is why these labels just don't matter anymore. These political spectrum labels, that just don't matter.
It's all breaking down in such a strange way, because I can imagine certain people listening, even the conversation up until the point so far, and walking away like those two racist bastards or whatever iteration of that they felt. And it's like there's none of the labels make sense, because I think you, as do I, sort of identify somewhat
I'm a classical liberal, but again, those liberals are being accused that they're being called the far right these days. I have a problem with the left. These wokes are not. Sometimes they're put in these, again, like we try to follow the old model, like liberal values, blah, blah, blah. So we put it in the left. We try to follow that. And that's why they get lumped into progressives. I mean, progressive, but they've got regressive policies. They want to control speech. They want to they want to victimize themselves. They want to go after themselves. Their own challenging the status quo is fine. That again, that's one of the progressive values. But at the same time, you cannot control speech. The only spectrum that does control speech, that's fascists. So since when did fascists become progressives? So I have, and again, like we have to justify. So we say, okay, we're classical liberals. No, hang on, you're the far right. So because we may have some conservative values, like, okay, there should not be uncontrolled migration. There should be good. If you want to help others, how can you help others by ruining yourselves? So it's just a bad argument for uncontrolled migration, or just taking in 5 million people in a country of, let's say, 50 million. That's just stupid. So that might be a conservative value. That might be considered back in the day, regressive or digressive values. But in this day and age, it's not. So, as I said, none of that makes sense. And it's because we're not willing to have honest conversations. We're not here. Everyone becomes so tribalistic, and they are so happy living in the echo chamber that they actually genuinely, I think they feel that the rest of the crowd doesn't matter. The political the landscape is changing right before our eyes. Geert Wilders, as I said, I brought it up, like he became, and Georgia Maloney, I know that's thanks to our strong systems that people can't come and have fascist policies straight away. That's thanks to the system. But how long is the system going to last? If you have 5 terms of people like Georgia Maloney or let's say Geert Wilders, I'm not saying these guys are racist, but I'm saying 5 generations of politicians down the line, they would be very racist. So if you want to avoid that dystopia, then have an honest conversation. Islam, that's the elephant in the room.
Yeah, absolutely. And this ties into a recent conversation you had recently with Armin Navabi, and you guys had a point of disagreement about, is these sort of stepping stones to something potentially very scary on the right, something that's actually healthy to help swing the pendulum back the other way, or are they actually sort of amplifying one another? And Armand's opinion was
Oh,
sort of, no, they're just purely amplifying another. And you contended that I think this is just sort of how it always goes.
yeah, that's my
And
optimism hoping, but he has a good point. Yeah, probably his point was in my subconscious state that I said the same thing, because yeah, that is a genuine concern. We make this mistake of, because we're living in these 20 sides on either side. It's a very unnormal thing, this peace and prosperity that we've been enjoying since the Second World War. If you look at the Second World War as well, people at that point thought that people were getting cars, they were getting running water to much of the population, but then look what happened. Second World War happened, and people were dragged out of their houses, and the kind of horrors that happened, unimaginable. It just happened to them. So to think this is hubris on a whole new level, to be so arrogant and think that what we've done or seen at the time of the Second World War, whether that was in China or Europe or anywhere, that's not going to happen again. No, we're way too civilized now. That's just sheer arrogance, and that's self-harm level arrogance.
And it's more than arrogance as well. It's ignorance. I mean, this is the cliche of, those who fail to learn history are doomed to repeat it. This is the source of that, is they don't understand. They do take it as a given that this is sort of the way of things. It's like, no, this is a consequence of recent developments in our social and political systems. This is something that should be championed and appreciated and preserved and expanded upon. But yeah, I think largely it just comes from a place of not knowing what came before, or I think people typically have just these vague milestones of history. And I can only imagine if we took the average Westerner and sort of had an illustration of how they view the long arc of history, it's probably very unsettling. So, we can get to Israel-Palestine now, actually. One of the, I'll give you some more context here and just sort of make my bias well known. Again, I'm not religious. We could have a whole conversation dedicated to criticizing Israel, and I'd be very happy to do so.
Mm.
But at the same time, my girlfriend is Israeli. She's over there now. I lived there for about 3.5 years. I did my master's degree at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. And all this is to say, I have some sort of bias and just kind of want to make that known as much as I try to abstract that from my thinking. But B, this is something, again, that I've experiencing some of these things and getting to talk to people on both sides and traveling through both Israel and Palestine. I think more so, of course, you benefit from visiting any place in the world if you want to understand the geopolitics and the culture and the people, but Israel more so than I think anywhere else. And
Yeah.
I want to talk first about Jerusalem and Al-Aqsa, because I think this is, everyone knows these things to some extent and recognize it as a cornerstone of the conflict, but I still think it's misunderstood and underweighted. So I just want to sort of spell out the historical and theological context, and if you have anything to add or if I get anything wrong.
How do you see that? How do you see that happen? This whole, Al-Aqsa Mosque, and how it became the cause uh, of the political dispute. How do you see it coming from, obviously, a non-Muslim side?
Well, I think I didn't honestly know a lot of the history until I had spent time there, and then that sort of just provoked me to take a look. And I think it speaks volumes because, people obviously sort of defer to just respecting that Muslims take it very seriously. It's in a very important place, and to leave it at that. But if you actually look at how Al-Aqsa came to be in the first place, I think it's very insightful about Islam in general, because again, just the long story short is essentially that, Muhammad's in Mecca in 620, 10 years after he announced his prophethood. He is met by Archangel Gabriel. They fly over on Barak, the magical white horse. They pray at the Temple Mount. He flies to heaven, convenes with the other prophets, speaks to God, and then brings that information back to the rest of the Muslim world. This happens in 620. Muhammad dies in 632. And then the Islamic conquest of Jerusalem is 636 and 637. And when we apply the atheist lens, it's rubbish. I mean, obviously I'm not willing to accept, and I'm sure you're not either, that there's a degree of truth to that. So then you ask the question, well, then why Jerusalem? And, I'll be somewhat charitable in the sense that, Muslims obviously value Moses and Abraham and Jesus. So there is some desire to be associated with that place. But the fact that so shortly after they have a conquest in Jerusalem, to me, it seems like a geopolitical move. It seems a way to shoehorn Islam and the story of Muhammad and all of this into an area that, frankly, they just wanted to be a part of a broader Islamic kingdom. And again, I think that's where it starts.
Hmm. Yeah, you're almost spot on. And that goes on to show, and this obviously happened after Muhammad's death, as you said, within 4 years in the reign of Caliph Umar. And Umar was hell-bent on conquest. And then you ask, and again, he was going to Syria as well, he was going to Yemen as well, he was going to Persia as well. I think he was going to Egypt as well. Egypt started basically in Abu Bakr's time. So he's literally going in all four directions, and you're spot on with that. Every war any general launches, he gives some sort of a pretext, of course. Like, you're going to Persia. Why are we going to Persia? It's because, the Zoroastrians or whatever, the evil people. Going to Egypt for whatever. Like, this is where these people did that to Moses or whatever. Just whatever. Like, I'm just making it up. I'm not saying that this is a pretext. But people give that pretext. But I'm actually not sure what was the exact pretext given before when Umar had Jerusalem captured. But it's not that far-fetched to say or to imagine that he would have said, look, this was our most holiest site. This is where Abraham came, like all that jazz. So a good, strong religious case or pretext could be made, and it needs to be brought in under the rulership of the most favorite or the current religion of Allah or God. So it might not be that difficult to make, but you're right. At the base of it, it's all about conquest, because it didn't start with Jerusalem or it didn't end with Jerusalem. It went as far as Spain and India. So it kept happening. It is a geopolitical issue. Even today, it's just such a geopolitical issue. And a lot of Muslims, there are two sides to the Palestinian argument. One is they say it's an ethnic claim. It's a human right claim. It's got nothing to do with religion. How freaking convenient to some of the most religious people on earth saying, well, you know what? We're going to ignore their religious claim because religions, we don't make political decisions on the basis of religion, okay? So it's indigenous people fighting for the land. It's like the North Americans, like the Aboriginals. How humanist of you, You're the people where pretty much every political claim that they have, it's almost a religious one, barring some economic ones. But every political issue, most of them, they are built at the foundation of it was religion. So yeah, these are beliefs of convenience, and I think the theological claim is absolutely absurd. I think the ethnic claim, even though I don't believe that they can trace their lineage all the way back to the Canaanites, I don't believe that. But to me, I follow historical conservatism. I follow the concept that what's done is done. You cannot change that. So even if these Palestinians can't prove their lineage to ancient Canaanites, just like the Jews can't prove that either. So it could go both ways. But that's not my reason for Israel's right to exist, and that therefore that can't be my reason for the expulsion of the Palestinian people from the region. So I would just say that it's done is done. There should be a two-state solution. But I'm listening to other opinions as well from other people. Some Jews are in favor of one-state solution. Actually, the majority of them. But I hadn't thought of that as a viable solution because I know my people. Even whatever reasons you may have for one-state solution, you're not going to be able to match in birth rate, fertility rates, and you're not going to be able to persuade a Muslim to drop his agenda of world conquest. You're not going to convince Muslims of that. So it's better what India did, and even they had 75 years of peaceful existence, but even then, now they're still going to be fine. I don't want to be an alarmist, but they still have about 250 million Muslims there, and they're constantly always worried about them. Again, I'm not saying that Muslims are wrong in that, or anyone's right or wrong. I'm just holistically saying that they're separated. If they hadn't separated, then add 240 million Pakistani Muslims, 240 million Indian Muslims, and another 200 million Bangladeshi Muslims. Had Indians not separated, they would have had almost, 50-45 or 50-40 um, uh, percentage breakdown. So Israel, I think Israel would have a thin majority to begin with over Palestinians. But is it going to stay like this over 10 years, 20 years? It's not. And because Western liberal or progressive ideas are it's very easy for them to flourish in Israeli population or Jewish population than in Muslim population. Therefore, that's the mistake the West keeps on making over and over again. The West thinks that, okay, because our progressive values are so good, the rest of the people, no matter what culture they come from, no matter how regressive or inward-looking culture they have, we're going to introduce them to our progressive values, and they'll be smitten by it, and they would convert in hordes. No, Europe has shown you 3 or 4 generations later, people are more looking inwards than they were, than their original ancestors were. So you can't woo everyone with your progressive leftist values. So if that's your assumption that, okay, well, if we live together in this united state of Israel and Palestine, then they will become like us. No, they won't become like you. They will make you a dhimmi. That's what they'll do.
Yeah, that's one thing that's always made me so cynical. Is it almost seems like, if from the Palestinian perspective, if you would like to take a nonviolent strategy to getting a single Palestinian state, wait. Because, like you said, the demographics are not in Israel's favor. And not only in the context of how many Arab Israelis, but you also have the ultra Orthodox population, which has an even higher birth rate. And these are people who, drain the system, don't serve in the military, are very much so against secular Israeli society, which actually sort of is the backbone that keeps everything going. I don't think it would be much longer. I think they would have enough support to just sort of sit. And I mean, the criticism I imagine getting to this is just that how can you expect them to wait under the conditions that they're living in, which of course I think is very fair. But at the same time, I think that would just be so much more effective from their standpoint. But yeah, I think I don't see a one-state solution working for the exact same reason. And being charitable to the Palestinians, it's also, why would they want to live in what is ultimately going to be the Jewish state? Like
But is it though? No, but that would not be the solution. Though the solution would be a secular state, and yes, the laws, the constitution would be a lot more in the Jewish favor. But the whole point is that would eradicate over time as the demographic change. So this is the reason why Muslims are hell bent on demanding a one state solution. I used to think, again, like a lot of my knowledge grew during this conflict, and I was selectively or consciously or subconsciously staying ignorant on seeing both sides of the argument, especially the Israeli side of the argument, because obviously all the Palestinian and Muslim side of the arguments I grew up with, so I knew them. So I didn't pay any attention, but now the more I've looked into it, I've understood, okay, the bone of contention. So we used to think, for example, in Pakistan, they said we want to go back to to a separate Palestine, a separate Israel, according to the UN's charter. That was what we grew up with. So we assume that Muslims are asking for a two-state solution, but that's not true. Muslims are not asking for a two-state solution. They're asking to wipe Israel off the map. That is absolutely, just to even think that we'll keep spilling our own blood. That's Hamas's strategy. They just issued another statement where they said we need more blood of Palestinian people. While they are sitting comfortably in foreign countries. So that's their war strategy. The more Palestinians die, the more we're going to cry, and as a result, a day will come when there would be so much pressure on Israel that they would say, "Okay, we're dissolving our state. Here's the keys." That's their war strategy. That's just stupid to think to even live up to it. And again, it's easy for them to say it because blood is in. There's a lot of supply of that for them. There are a lot of videos that they can send out. Um, so it's so wicked at the heart of it that you can't help but feel sad and almost depressed for thinking for ordinary Palestinian people. And you think that you're just being used. You are just being used. And if it's not a political cause, like, oh, we're fighting for indigenous people fighting for their land, then there's another layer to it, that justification that comes from religion. That's why Mohammed Hijab, you know why he keeps saying this over and over again? The IDF is coward, the IDF is coward. As if it's like a street fight or something. You're going to go with your muscles and you're going to show you, hey, I'm a better member. Never in history wars have ever been fought that way. Never. It's always been about the skill of a warrior and the technology that he's had. And that's the IDF is using that. And then he is basically sending his Muslim population that we are brave people, we are men, we are not afraid to die. That's the Muslim mentality. The West doesn't understand that, and that's why you see these happy dancing women who say that, oh, I just lost one son, I have three more. It's at the base of it is Islam. It's wicked. It's wicked. The reason why we can't control insurgencies or guerrilla warfare against Islamic against places where there's Islamic radicalism. Yeah, you managed to defeat the Germans and the Japanese because it was just a political issue. The West is good at dealing with things politically, but because the West has moved on from theology or states that used to have a huge influence of the church, they expect the rest of the world to behave in a similar manner. They don't. Muslims, they don't just get strength. It's a double-edged sword. Not only that they have this political rhetoric that motivates people to fight, there's another layer. They have the religious rhetoric as well. You're gonna be in heaven. You're gonna have the best time of your life. Your purpose. Allah chose you. Allah gave you life so you could die one day. So it's a wicked, and that's why the West is constantly struggling against that. And now barbarians are not at the gate; they are inside the gate. This ticking time bomb situation that we have, this demographic explosion that we're going to have by the middle of the century. If it's this bad now, imagine 2050, if things don't change. And I don't think they're going to change because the birth rate is not going to increase. The only thing that could change us is probably the rise of AI. That's probably the only thing, and probably longer lifespan maybe, because then people would have, even Muslims would have a less reason to make more babies.
Yeah, well, one point. I mean, I think this is still a Sam Harris talking point to this day, but exactly as you're suggesting, Westerners, I think that they hear people talk about jihad and a lot of like the death cult like beliefs of Islam, and I think they just don't really believe it. And I've asked myself, what information are they missing? I mean, because it's out there. I mean, in so many different forms, but I don't know if it's a matter of it needs to be spoon fed in a different way. It needs to be communicated by a different person, or I can't find anything close to an answer I feel confident with, but there's a clear sense of, no, they're not actually interested in this. They don't really believe that. It's like, no, this is really, really something that these people hold dearly and believe with full conviction. And then you have to empathize with them in the sense that, put yourself in their shoes and now consider that you believe with full conviction that if you die under these circumstances, which is horrible for everyone else but your group, you are guaranteed a spot in eternal bliss and happiness. And you really have to roll that around in your head and really digest, oh my God, this is madness.
Unbelievable at this. And to make matters worse, you think, so we've established that two different types of cultures in their entirety. Just because you share some basic feelings like love, anger, hatred, or whatever, and then you reduce it to that level and you say, well, we're all humans, we're all equal. Yeah, we have spiteful people, we have happy people, we have comedians or whatnot. So they do. Therefore, we're all equal. But at the base of it, the way they look at life, the most fundamental phenomena of creating a society is life, the preservation of life. So how and the West is built upon a certain idea of life, that this is how life operates. This is what we need to do. We value our disabled. We make budgetary. We leave huge budgets so a certain public buildings are accessible to people with different abilities, who are differently abled. I believe that's the correct term these days. So we do that because the West has a certain mindset about approaching life. Now there's another culture who grew up, and it's not just Nazism that's only 10 years old. It's existed for 1400 years, and it has evolved for the last 1400 years. They've had modifications in their way of thinking as well, but they followed a different path, and they look at life differently. They believe it's okay to die and kill if someone looks at your sister in a different manner. I'm not saying whether that is a good quality or bad quality. I'm just simply saying that that's a totally different way of thinking. Or if she marries a groom of her own choice, it is good enough for family members to murder him and her, and even then die as a result himself as well. This is something the majority of the West doesn't think that way. But the entirety of Afghanistan and the KPK Pakhtun areas, they all think that way. I dare you say it. So again, I'm not saying, without going in the debate of whether that's right or wrong, I'm simply saying that they've had a different evolution. They have a different understanding of the concept of life, how we ought to approach it. And then we have these politicians who had this arrogance and ignorance, and that they thought that we're going to bring these people in, and we're going to we're just going to, and they're going to be like us, because at the base of it, they're just like us. That was arrogance and ignorance, but they were not really as ignorant as we might think now. If you, they were talking about these same topics in the book, The Clash of Civilizations. Jacques Chirac and other French politicians at the time, they were worried about the demography shift, but they had no solution to increasing the birth rates. So they said, well, okay, we'll do it now. We'll solve the problem. It was a Band-Aid solution. And 30 years later, 40 years later, well, people are still applying Band-Aid. But this time, at least at that point, they were trying to find a solution. This time, we're just sleepwalking into it. People don't even recognize it. Like the leftist wokes don't even recognize it. So it's even more dangerous, and I fear that not much is going to change, and it's going to be a lot worse by 2050. Yeah, I don't know. Could be scary.
No, absolutely. And I think sadly, we have a lot more, it's going to get a lot worse before we can really expect for it to get better. And
Yeah.
Furthermore, in the context of immigration, the thing that's interesting to me as well is, take yourself as an example, immigrating from Pakistan to Australia when you're 18, 19. Obviously, I think everyone would agree that you are a gift to Australia. Everyone in the West is very happy that you're here, and so on.
I don't think so, but anyway, yeah.
I'll go out on a limb and say so. My point being, there are many people from these countries that obviously are wonderful people who contribute to society, and everything is great.
Oh, yeah. So
something like a Muslim ban, that Trump has put forth and may very well put forth again, obviously isn't the
That's
solution.
bad as well.
Yeah.
And that's what happens.
So,
this is the earlier point that I had made, that this is what happens when you ignore it. Then you go to the other extreme, and then everyone suffers.
So how do you have any advice or a vision of how you might imagine the immigration policy to evolve? Because we need to filter for people who have these beliefs without violating, freedom of religion at the end of the day.
Well, there has to be an intent, first of all. First of all, we have to say that, okay, we don't accept that. Okay, whatever that is, whatever value it is, but we're not sending that message. We have seen what happened in Britain with this is a two-tiered police system. The way they handle Tommy Robinson and the way they handle those people who desecrated British war monuments, which purposefully, which knows, again, like, it's not, then the Muslims go into, well, freedom of speech, what happened now? So again, it's a different way. They have a different philosophy of life. So first of all, you need to send a signal that we don't accept that. They just one of the London councils, they just cancelled Hanukkah celebrations, and they cited that we're worried that there could be some hate crimes against them, basically facilitating, saying that, well, there could be some radical Muslims who might come and hurt you, and not only just you, but also us, the staff of this council.
Yeah.
So they basically surrendered. So deep down inside, they know. The other way around, they would have never said that. If that was Eid or Ramadan or something, they would have never said that. We're going to cancel because of this current climate. Never. You know why? Because no Muslim would be scared that someone is going to come and do anything. But Jews are scared. Every Jew I've spoken to, they are literally, they are concerned. They're scared. So you need to send a signal first. 100% unacceptable. We're going to come down hard at you. Like, for example, cancelling Shamima Begum's citizenship. That was a good signal. I'm telling you, that was a good signal. That scares a lot of Muslims. Even though we knew in effect it would never have been applied on thousands of people, or even everyone who did commit terrorism. We know that. Like, in London, they record them planning a terrorist attack, and then they release him after 3 years. He's rehabilitated, blah, blah, blah. Why did you not cancel his citizenship? Because we know it's not practical, but at least it sends a good signal. It sends a good signal. So that kind of signals that you need to send at this time, that we're not going to accept it. A lot of them will filter out. A lot of them are paper tigers. They will fizzle away. They're like, yeah, okay, you know what? Screw you. I'll just go I'll make my own money. I have no interest in that. And people lose interest. It's human nature as well. People do lose interest. So that's first. Secondly, that's what you got to do with the population that is already within your borders. Secondly, I'm not saying cut down immigration, because that is your important. I mean, you need that. You need
healthy for many reasons. Yeah.
You can't live without it. But at the same time, don't turn your back on your human rights principles either. So do help out people. I have personally helped out people from Pakistan who are atheists, genuine concern, and not only just atheists, people who are Muslims too. They could also be victims of political turmoil. So bring them in, but strongly vet them. Do not compromise on your values. Some people say, yeah, well, they could lie. Yeah, of course they could lie. But again, it's about the signal. And when you're dealing at societal level, you basically send signals to, and you basically essentialize what is acceptable in this culture. And this is how culture moves forward and evolves. But they haven't been doing that. They've been pussyfooting around, sending the signal message. They don't do it. By the way, they can be pretty harsh it's not free for all kind of asylum too. They are pretty tough too at some point. But again, they don't do it in front of the world. They don't send the signal that you need to send. That's why you see when a certain government comes in Australia, when the Liberals come, boats turn away because of the policies. People, smugglers know that, well, we're not going to get in there. It's not going to be profitable for them. So they don't come to Australia. They go to Europe instead. But when the Labour Party comes, they start looking into it. They're like, oh, okay. Because again, it's a signal. Labour MP is going to say, we welcome all refugees. We have a lot of land. That's, oh, yeah, okay. All right. I'll go there. So it's about, at that level, it's all about sending signals. But I don't think these Western governments are sending those signals. None of them are. And Canada is the worst one, I think, out of all of them. They said, don't worry, just
come. As an American, I have to agree.
I personally know two people who have gone to Canada just because of the PR that they've seen. They know Canada is the best. I don't know them personally, like as in like my family, but like through these YouTube, the Twitter space places, I just from the circle. And I'm like, wow. You went window shopping. Should I go to Germany? Should I go to France, Belgium? Canada. that seems really nice. I think they're very nice. I'll go there. So yeah, so that tells you what kind of signals you're sending.
But do you worry? My intuitive thought to that is that it also might have the opposite effect, at least if you go hardline enough. Because if you start signaling too much or in the wrong way, I could imagine people saying, well, screw them, we're coming over
Yeah,
and we're
that
gonna.
happens all the time. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
absolutely. It happens all the time. Like you send a signal, and then your far right bigots get into action. Then they start taking over. So yeah, so that's what I'm saying. Like, it's all about signal, and very subtly, like, just stay in the middle kind of thing. You don't embolden one side, but at the same time, you don't embolden their enemies either. It's about a delicate balance, but I think that delicate balance is way out of whack. We are definitely seeing in England this two-tiered police system. Um, More or less, I think it's happening pretty much everywhere. It's unrecognizable from what the world was 20 years ago. Unrecognizable.
yeah. And kind of coming full circle to the beginning of our conversation, the problem is, again, having this type of dialogue. It's a very fine line. I don't think it's as fine as some people think, but at least outwardly looking in, it can be a very fine line in terms of, I think people conflate criticizing Islam and persecuting Muslims. And I think that's at the heart of the issue, is learning, at least having people, because again, I'm sure people who very well might watch this and have a very uncharitable read and assume all sorts of horrible things. But the reality is, I don't think there's anything in conflict about saying Islam is a death cult. It's disgusting in more ways than we have time to talk about. But if a Muslim was, if whether it be my neighbor or a random person on the street, etc., if somebody was actively, being cruel in any way, shape, or form towards that person, including just on the basis of being Muslim, I, and I'm sure many other people who share our opinions more or less, would stand up and say, "Hey, cut it out." And I think people see that you can only really have it one way, and you can't. You can do both. You can protect the person, be kind to people, ultimately allow for whatever they'd like to believe, and still say, "Hey, but it's absurd. Let's talk about it."
But at the same time, they would argue that, okay, the kind of conversation that we have on Islam and Muslims and immigration and whatnot, sure, that gives rise to people like you who are open-minded, who would still stand up for the rights of a Muslim. But the same words could fall on the ears of someone else, and they become hateful towards Muslims. So they could argue with that as well. And unfortunately, this is how the world works. Whatever you do, there's two. It's created in twos and opposite to each other. So how about if I told you, now that's obviously the West's problem that you've said, and this is again the oppressor-oppressed paradigm, us dominant white people, them brown people, as if this is it. They're just reduced to that little circle. Whether you have your differences, whatever movements are going on within you, I don't care. I'm so self-absorbed that I'm going to look at it from my perspective only. Oppressor, white man, oppressed, brown man. What's happening under that? Not interested. But what if I told you that even Muslims, again, this is how the philosophy of life differs from the West. They say it's okay for you to victimize us, but please don't say anything about Prophet Muhammad. Islam is perfect. Muslims, we're not perfect. In some cases, they are in the right. But they say, no, we could be wrong, but don't say anything about our Prophet. So, again, individualism and standing up for individuals and individual freedoms and liberty, etc. These are very Western concepts. It's very individualistic, whereas that's very collective, and that it pretty much affects the whole output of how they perceive life. This is why you see this propaganda. They keep showing that all Palestinians are dancing despite of all these ruined buildings around them. They are still happy, and because they're not afraid to die. There was another headline on the Guardian, I think, or somewhere, that many Americans are looking into the Quran to work out why Palestinians are so content with life. Yeah, so it's like, so that is the PR campaign. This is what they're selling, and yeah, it's great if you live in a bee colony or an ant-hive, that's great. But societies, again, without going into what's right and wrong, I don't want to offend anyone, but usually I do that. But I'm just trying to focus on the actual strength of the argument, that that one side values individual freedoms and the other side doesn't. Which one you think you want to look into, or which one you want to live into? So yeah.
Well, I'll ask you one final question, even though, just as an aside, I have this list in front of me that I mentioned, maybe, 1/20th of what I have. So there's endless things to talk about on this front, but I'll end with one in particular. How do you, I guess it's a two-sided question. One is more pragmatically and one is more idealistically. How do you see, or how do you hope Islam to evolve in the future? Do you hope it sort of fizzles out with the rest of the religions and we enter this global secular society? Or do you think we should get to the goal is really to see some degree of reform such that there can be even theocratic states like Israel in Saudi Arabia and all across the Middle East and Pakistan and so on, where you still have, I mean, again, that's the biggest kudos I will give to Israel probably, is that you have extreme religious fanaticism, Jewish fanaticism in Israel, yet it's not in conflict mostly with, LGBT stuff in Tel Aviv or drugs and alcohol and all these other things. They're able to say, carve out a corner for each of us. Any way of life is ultimately okay here. More or less, which is not the case in most of the Islamic theological societies. So do you see that as something that could actually be achieved, or the nature of Islam is such that that's not something we can ever look forward to?
I was watching this World War II documentary where this really old, frail, almost immobile looking elderly woman, French woman, who was recounting her story of how she was a part of the resistance against the Nazis in occupied Paris. And it always fascinates me. So obviously this is in the 40s, early 40s, and they show her photo. She's young, strong woman, master of her destiny, fully in control of the whole world in a way, the world of that time, of course, just on a smaller scale, Paris only, but planning this recapture of Paris, master of her destiny, and then she's in this stage where she's just a total relic of the past, and she needs her current generations looking after them and everything. And now she's handed this over to the next generation. So this is what we're doing. We're basically handing whatever we're doing now. We see like, okay, we're controlling the narrative. We're shifting. You have so many of these phenomena taking place at the same time. We think that we're in charge, but 40, 50 years down the track, or babies that are born today, kids who were born in the 90s, or let's just say 2000s, late 90s and 2000s, they've come up with this wokeism, this, in many ways, very fascinating property of a human mind, that how can it even think that way? This pathological altruism. Nobody could have predicted this end result of it, or whichever way it's headed. So it's not only just dangerous. This wokeism is not only just dangerous for the West only. I have a feeling it might have one trick up its sleeve against Islam as well, against Islam. And again, Islam is not going to be the same players that are today here, who are very aggressive and seem very confident in the defense of Islam, and they may give you the illusion that Islam is here to stay. Those people will not be involved anymore. They would not be there anymore. In 20, 30 years' time, they'll be replaced by someone else with new thought or new thinking, whatever. They're like a bit more woke themselves. And it's not that far-fetched. I covered this story a while ago, where this Danish Muslim woman became the first female imam of a mosque. And she was breaking these stereotypes against men. Only men can be imams. Imam being the guy who leads the prayer. So she's changing that. And I think that now I looked, there's quite a few female imams in and around England and European countries. There's a LGBTQ mosque in London. Um, so, so yes, we see Andrew Tates, we see Muhammad Hijabs, but a lot of these things are happening beneath the surface too. So just saying that if we're worried that by 2050 there might be 40-50% Muslims, I'm just exaggerating, in France, then at the same time, you don't know how many of them could be LGBTQ for mosques, or how many of them could be really chilled kind of Muslims. So so it's not all just doom and gloom. I mean, yeah, I'm a big believer of these two forces working in unison with each other. There's just sometimes, because our lifespans are so short and their lifespans, cultural lifespans, are a bit longer. So they feel that they happen so slowly. We think that, oh, the one side is winning. But now, hang on, something will happen and the other side will bring it right back in the middle. So that's just a constant tug of war that's taking place. So I don't see. But again, in history, empires have fallen as well. The other alternative, do you want me to tell you the dark side as well? The other alternative is Islam may come out unscathed, despite the threat of wokeism and atheism, and Christianity is long dead. And they stay firm in their resolve of conquering the world. And let's start with this beautiful Europe. You're going to have a lot of people who are going to convert to Islam because they're going to be opportunistic. They'll be like, well, why be a loser in a losing cause? So a lot of them would unite. And again, this story has been repeated millions of times before. Not millions, probably millions of times, but many times in the case of Muslims. That's what happened in Egypt. That's what happened in, Iran, Iraq, and all these places. That's what happened. It didn't happen in India because the Indian population, Hindus and Muslims, by the time they got to India, they had also evolved. A couple of generations had passed, so they had also softened a little bit. They had softened to a point that Prophet Muhammad said only Jews and Christians can live under an Islamic caliphate and they have to pay jizya. It didn't leave any room for polytheists. Polytheists were either dead or convert to Islam. That's it. No other option. So by the time Muslim conquerors got to India, even the first guy, Muhammad bin Qasim, he pleaded the governor of Hijaz at the time, Harun Rashid, who also happened to be his uncle, he pleaded him. He said, "There's so many Hindus here. We can't just convert them to Islam or just put them to sword." So they included Hindus, even polytheists, in a category that you can pay jizya and you can live under us. So they had those were the wokes of the time. They were saying, "No, come on, it's not okay. We can't really kill them just for their belief." So those were the wokes of that time. So but the point is, there's always been a little bit of progress. So let's just say this time it doesn't happen, and they keep going, and then you're going to have these people convert to Islam. Some will be made second or third class citizens, and then you think that Israel-Palestine is an apartheid state. Imagine what kind of state that would be. Sorry, is your name not Muhammad? Okay, there's extra 15% levy tax on you because it's a jizya part of it. So that's the dark side. But that Europe would not be a threat to the world because Muslims don't have a culture of education. They're not going to rise up to the level of these Western powers. They're actually going to bring them down. So So in that case, the future belongs to China and India only, I believe. That's a very dark side.
I think that's a very nice.
I think America would still be fine. Situation. America might still be fine.
We have, and Australia. I mean, it's just the Western countries that are sort of pigeonholed in corners of the globe.
Australia is small. Whatever happens in Europe, it can happen here. But now we're safe right now. But I think by that point, we'd be doing PhD programs on how much Islamic migration is acceptable without changing the face of your country. Yeah.
It's scary. I share the duality of your take there because, for me, it honestly varies by the day. Some days I take the former and I go, I think that this will sort of sort itself out with a long enough time, and maybe the wokeism will have, sort of a positive side of things here and be applied in a better way. And then other times, it's again, it goes back to the key point of Westerners they on the whole do not understand how these people think. They value different things. They will not be easily convinced to quote unquote come on to our side. They're looking
Mm.
for a totally different outcome than we are,
Mm.
and it requires
It's
a
a
totally
stated
different
position
strategy
too.
than
It's
we've
not a
taken. Yeah,
conspiracy.
it's
It's not
open.
like
It's very
Rothschild are
open.
working in the background.
Yeah,
They say
yeah,
with their own mouths.
yeah. Yeah, I mean the amount of, I mean, you can see leaders from, the very long list of different Islamic terrorist groups that will say, Rome is next, or we're coming for London, or they are explicit about it. But again, I think it gets dismissed as, no, but like, not really. That must just be the Alex Jones of their society, and it's like,
Yeah, yeah.
no, it's actually not. That's exactly the problem. But they
And
don't take that
and
extra step.
and I've been saying it for a very long time. I just feel, I know it could be just a moment, momentary shock in the West about these pro-Palestine protests that they've seen, and as a result, Geert Wilders was surprised that he won. And I reckon these protests have a huge role in making him win the elections. And I think that if elections were held in every major Western country, I reckon a lot of people who usually don't pay attention to these issues, they would be shaken. But the point is, the problem is that there's not going to be any more elections. So America is next year. Oh, sorry, yeah, next year.
Yep,
England is
yep.
next year, etc. So the major ones, Germany just had one. I don't know about, yeah, France just had one. So the major ones are not going to have it. And would we remember this, or forget about it again? Would we be overly charitable to their behavior again? Um, Unfortunately, looking at humans' track record, yeah, we're going to forget about it.
Yep.
And I don't know, and that's the job of an activist, to keep popularizing these ideas. I think I have enormous respect for Tommy Robinson for now, especially after he got arrested again, and I think he's going to be arrested again. I've never seen him say anything racist, but I've seen people around him saying racist things. But he pays the price again. Like it could come from somewhere else, like his own desire. He must be an ambitious person, whatever. Like that, but that's how humans work. Um, but he's paying a price. He's paying a pretty heavy price. He has daughters, and he gets harassed, and it must be something to be victimized by your own police, your own system, the whole system
Yeah.
being against you. And I know this because I mean, as a Pakistani, I know this, but I don't feel that because I don't live in Pakistan. But yeah, anyway, so.
Okay. Well, again, thank you so much for taking the time. As you said, the role of the activist, the role of people like yourself, is to keep it in the front of people's minds. And I definitely subscribe to the idea that the more people are having these conversations, especially publicly, the more people are doing anything to keep it front of mind, the more likely that outcome will be positive. So again, thank you so much, and hopefully we'll get the chance to speak again.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.